In the comments to my video, Keep the Story Out of My Game, community member Panic Satanic sent me a long comment. In a recent game, they played a character who rolled very low wisdom. The way they role-played this was for the character to be impulsive. When there was a suspiciously perfect meal just sitting there in a cave, their character took a bite. This was not a tactically sound move. It was not the best move for the party, but that's who the character is. I'm curious if that playstyle would have annoyed me. Well, it's a good question. The answer is,
well, no and yes.
Yes and no, if I'm being completely honest. But it's not really about efficiency. And in an earlier comment, they brought up the character of Pippin.
What about second breakfast?
I appreciate players who want to play Pippin-like characters, but I think there's a problem with this, or a catch, and I'm going to call it the Pippin Problem. If you're not familiar with Pippin, he's a character in the Lord of the Rings books. You really have to separate movie Pippin from book Pippin, because movie Pippin is just a goof with very little else going on. Book Pippin is more complex and well-rounded as a character. But either way, Pippin certainly, in both occasions, has his moments. An example that Panic Satanic brought up was Pippin, out of curiosity, going and grabbing the Palantir and having that little dialogue, if you will, with Sauron, which appears in both the books and the movies. We might call this took-like curiosity or impetuousness a quirk. If we look up the definition of a quirk, the one that applies most to this conversation is peculiarity of behavior. So Pippin has this, we might say, an uncontrollable curiosity. He just can't help himself. He's got to go touch the thing. He's got to drop the rock down the well. He's got to grab the Palantir when nobody's looking. We say, okay, that's their quirk. I don't have a problem with quirks. I think it's great for characters to have quirks. Back in the day, when I would be home by myself for a summer holiday, I would buy gaming books, and I would spend a lot of time doing character generation just to do it. It was like a mini game. It was like before the game Role Player came out. It was, hey, I could sit down, and I did this with Marvel, and I did this with GURPS and a bunch of other games in GURPS. They had this concept of quirks where you could take a little behavioral tick almost, and they would give you a point back or something that you could throw into some other mechanical benefit that you wanted to. It's a way for, you could stretch the system a little bit. Ooh, I just want that thing. Oh, if I take a quirk, I get a point back. And it's great. I like it. And I think it can be a useful tool in the game for fleshing out your character. And if you are doing some kind of a character generation, if that's character generation is part of the game, or that separate almost game of character generation interests you, quirks are a way to sort of like the take a penny, leave a penny bowl of character generation. You could take one, and it gives you a little bit, but it's not very deterministic about your character. Just a little thing. Fictional characters have quirks all the time. I'm going to pick up one, again, dating myself, Mr. T from the A-Team, B.A. Baracus. B.A. Baracus hates airplanes or flying or both. In just about every episode, they have to fly somewhere, so there's always a kind of a skit at the beginning of the episode where they've taken on a job, and they got to fly somewhere, and they got to figure out how to knock B.A. out to get him on the plane. And there's lots of bits with, oh, you put the sleeping stuff in my hamburger. So they start trading hamburgers around. And of course, Mr. T, B.A. Baracus always ends up with the hamburger that's got the thing in it, or it's really in the drink, or something else. And it's a haha moment. But it happens one time in an episode, once. Jane from Serenity might be another good, more recent example, though, gosh, Serenity's pretty old now, too, of a character. He's got that quirk, anti-authoritarian, dirty player kind of quirk, but he usually will come up once. Unless the episode is about Jane, his behavior will surface one time, but then maybe there's some grumbling or some other things, but he's going to fall in line and do what needs to be done. He's going to have his one moment of that character quirk. The issue I have with how players tend to use quirks in role-playing games is they become this all-encompassing behavior that's happening all the time. The thief who doesn't just pickpocket once, but every encounter, every time there's something, they engage this behavior. And you get that old refrain of, well, it's what my character would do. But they lack that concept of less is more, or using it in a particular moment. They decide that this is their quirk, and then it becomes really, it's not even a quirk anymore. It's really their main behavior. The example that Panic Satanic brought up, there's a meal sitting in a cave, so take a bite. It's like every time there's food, which tends to be multiple times in a session, this is happening all the time. And then everyone else has to play around that or deal with that. If everybody did this, you'd never get anything done. It puts a lot of pressure because then no one else can have this kind of quirk, or everyone's just dealing with the quirk all the time. So when I say I do like it, yeah, I like it. Have a little quirk and give yourself a little bit of your own characterization and play into it, but do it with moderation. And I find that most times players don't. And so you end up with this immoderate flood of behavior, and that I don't like. So if you were playing a character, and I did a video on this ages ago for players, maybe I'll link to it somewhere you can take a look. If you are playing with a quirk, do it once in the session. Pick your moment, have your little moment, and I would say, look, don't try to just mess everything up for everybody. Mr. T doesn't tend to, or B.A. Baracus, doesn't tend to have that moment. It happens at a time where the stakes are fairly low. When Jane usually has its moments, it's usually the stakes are very low. It's not when the stakes are high and suddenly they do that. It might happen at the end of an arc or a very serious thing. It is fun to bring up these characters and what they're going through and have an impact, but not all the time. So think about in a session play, do it once. Pick your moment, come up with a moment, have it, move along. If you find that you are engaging with your quirk every encounter in every session, then it's not a quirk anymore. And I would say dial it down. And yes, I do find that behavior annoying when somebody is just deciding that everything they're going to do, well, I've got low wisdom, so now every time something comes up, I'm going to do the most unwise thing. Talking to Daniel, Bandit's Keep, at one point, we were talking about this very issue, variation on this issue. And he said, which I thought was a great point, is, hey, we were talking about at a con game, so you're playing a level 3, level 4 character. And he said, listen, you're playing a level 4 adventurer. You're not some noob. You're not some hayseed out of the woods. If you really had this low wisdom and you were doing the things you're doing in the game, you never would have made it to 4th level. Think about kind of who you are in the context of the game. If you're a 4th level adventurer, you now know you have survived eating, just to use Panic Satanic's thing, that eating every meal that just shows up somewhere when it's not yours is a bad idea. So you might have moderated that behavior some. It's part of that character journey. Sure, you start off and you're just some rube out of the woods who's like, wow, look at that free pie on the window. Yum, 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 yum. If you're level 4 and now you're a hero and you've had all kinds of adventures and you're still doing that same pie in the window, yum, 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 you're not growing. So on the one hand, people will say about quirks that, oh, hey, this is my characterization. But then that characterization never changes. They never grow. So I might even ask to say, hey, look, every time you level up, look at the quirk or quirks that you have and shake them up. Change one out. Give one a twist. Say, you know what? Yeah, at first level, I was eating every meal I came across because I was hungry. I was starving. I was poor. I didn't know how to deal with that. But now I'm flush with, I don't know how many thousands of silver or gold pieces that we've gotten on adventures. So now maybe it's going to manifest in a different way. And I can show that evolution and, keep it on your sheet. Put a little X, put a little line through it. Now write your new quirk. How is that eating just free meals evolved? Maybe now it's that you're a gourmand, that you've gotten used to the fine taste of things. So now if you're just a lowly tavern in some kind of down and out district of town, you wouldn't even think of eating the food. You must find the best and pay whatever prices you can because now you've tasted delicacies, you've tasted viands from across the world, and you can no longer deal with that. It's still an interesting quirk. It still can lead to interesting situations, but it's showing some evolution. The variation of this kind of, I'm going to use my quirk all the time. I'm going to call it, this is what my character would do, but with dice. So here's the situation. I'm going to use Panic Satanic's character as my exemplar, character with low wisdom, and they've decided that every time they see a meal, they want to eat it, whether it's sitting in a cave, at somebody else's table, whatever. They see something, it's unattended, they want to go take a bite. That's their quirk. What will happen is someone will take that quirk and say, I've got low wisdom, and this is what I've decided my low wisdom means. But, I'm not just going to do it. I'm going to roll my wisdom. If I make my wisdom roll, then they will have resisted. And if I don't make my wisdom roll, then they're going to do the thing that they want to do. Here's my personal hot take. I hate this.
I hate him! I hate him!
I hate this with the passion of 1,000 suns. But let me tell you why. I find it extremely disingenuous. Don't hide behind the dice. No one's asking you to roll the dice. The GM isn't saying, roll dice for your wisdom. This is something that you are doing, you, the player. And when I think people do this, because then they get to hide behind the dice and say, hey, it wasn't me. This wasn't my decision. I know I picked the quirk. I know I decided to engage or not, but I rolled dice. So therefore, if I miss my wisdom check and I go eat the meal and that meal summons an ogre or whoever's cave we're in, and now it's a TPK, man, it wasn't me. It was the dice. I hate it. If you want to play someone with low wisdom and that does that quirk, then at least own it and say, this is what I'm going to do. And I'm not suggesting this is what Panic Satanic did with their character. I mean, as they mentioned that was their quirk and they did it. At least I can then look at some, hey man, you made that choice. I don't necessarily agree with it, but at least you're owning up to it was your choice as a player to do this. But what I find is people say, oh, look, the dice decided. He. No, the dice didn't decide.
You arrogant ass. You've killed us.
If I'm the GM, I didn't ask you to roll those dice. You decided to do it, and you did it because then you can hide behind the dice. And if you got low wisdom, then chances are you're going to miss that roll. So chances are you're going to do the thing you want to do, but now you get to say, it wasn't me. Oh, look at that. Oh, the dice. Oh, it wasn't the dice. It was you. So just own it. Take responsibility for what you're doing. Don't put it as somehow this is the dice, the universe, the game. No, it's you. The other thing is low attributes, it will all come out in the wash. Depending on the system you're playing, there are going to be different mechanics that tie into all those attributes. If you have low wisdom, that will surface in many ways. You do not have to go out of your way to play the person as some kind of dullard unless you want to. Same thing with intelligence. It comes through in languages. If you're using a roll under stat or some other system, it will come out. If your guy with low intelligence says, I'd like to take this guano that I'm seeing in this cave and turn it into gunpowder, and the GM goes, roll intelligence, and you only have intelligence of 6, your plan's going to fail some way, and that manifests as that low learning. I don't like to think of it even as really intelligence. I like to think of it as maybe learning, education, books, that sort of thing. It will come out. If you have low dex, when you need to do dex stuff, you will fail, and then it comes out. You as a player do not need to put on top of it this extra thing. You can have a wisdom of 18 and still have this quirk. Oftentimes, some of the most brilliant people have some quirks about them. You don't have to have low wisdom and still have that, hey, no, I can't resist free food, or a food that at least seems free. That's fine. It has nothing to do with your wisdom, or at least I don't think it does. If you want to be someone who's, he's super wise, but he's just got this weird quirk. We have whole generations of people, if you're of a certain age, your grandparents may have been in the Great Depression, and they will show certain behaviors because of having been born in that particular crucible, often, hoarding things and preserving because they went through a period of severe lacking. And so when they have stuff, they don't find it that easy to just toss stuff away. They remember somewhere in the back of their brains that scarcity. If you want to play a character who has been through a similar experience, own that characterization and take it. You don't have to wait for, my wisdom. I mean, if you had 10s across the board, that doesn't mean that you're quirkless just because you don't have a super low stat. The game system will take care of it. You as the player don't have to do that. And like I would say is take responsibility. Don't say, it's because their wisdom is low. Just say no, because this is what I want to do. This is who I think this character is. I'm great with that. We don't need to hide behind the mechanics. The mechanics will take care of themselves. Your stats will come up. You're playing BX and you're using roll under, there can be plenty of times you're going to goof on something because your dex is low, or you're going to misunderstand something because your intelligence is low, or a plan or some kind of thing you're putting together is going to go awry. It'll all come out, and then you can play up the consequences of that however you like. You don't have to take it upon yourself. Just have some quirks and own them. Don't need to tie them to your attribute. Remember the rest of the table when you're using these quirks. Panic Satanic brought up pretty much the perfect encapsulation, right? The non-ideal actions. Think about that. Think on that a bit, because everyone's here for a good time. Everyone's here to try to do well, whatever that means. And yes, there's a lot of context and obviously what your particular game is and what it's about and all that, right? Take all that into consideration. But now you're in this game. So when you think about, hey, I want to do a thing that's kind of for me. These character quirks, they're really for me. They're for you as the character, the player individually. It's not part of the greater group. So you're doing something to really give yourself a giggle, do something for yourself. It's a little bit of self-gratification, which is fine, but keep it in the perspective of, hey, we got a whole bunch of people here. And when I've seen some of the stuff surface, and I've been at tables where it's happened, where I'm at a con game, at a one-shot, and hey, we want to get through the thing. We want to try to see the entire, do as well as we can. We want to be efficient, because if we're inefficient, we may die. And I see someone who in the very first room of the dungeon decides to do one of these things and put us in peril to engage with a quirk. I think to myself, why are you doing this? You're having a blast. I'm not having a blast. So I have to go bail you out, and maybe you die, maybe I die, maybe it cascades to a TPK in the first room of the dungeon. I'm playing a one-shot. I'd like to be playing for the next 3 hours. I don't really want to be making new characters or starting over. I'd like to kind of get somewhere. That to me is not good sportsmanship. At least ask the table. Ask your fellow players, hey, do you mind if I do this? I have this character and my idea is that such and such. I think this might be tough, but you mind? This might add, I think it's going to be fun, or I hope it's going to be fun, but it's dangerous. Is it okay? Maybe I can find a spot where I can have my fun and it's less fraught. I can find a lower risk, a lower tension spot and have my little laugh or engage with my little character moment that I want to have, and it not endanger the fun for everybody else. Getting back to Pippin. Everybody, I think, who plays the game has moments where they are the Pippin, where they make bad decisions, where they do things that are inefficient and maybe a little bit selfish and certainly foolhardy. We just do this as a point of playing the game. We mistake the potion that we think is going to give us strength for one that makes us weak. We decide to dive into the pool to see something that glints of gold and ends up unleashing a monster. We decide to reach for the thing we shouldn't reach for, to go for the thing we should do. Who has played this game for any length of time hasn't been the one that touched the Palantir, to use the Pippin example? We have all done that. We all have our moments of being Pippin, just like we have our moments of being Aragorn or Gandalf. It happens all the time. That you don't need to invent the Pippin or specifically be the Pippin. I'm going to be the Pippin, because we're all the Pippin. We weigh in our brains those little bits of, man, I really want that shiny, but I know I really shouldn't. We don't need somebody to be the Pippin. You don't need to take on the role of I must be the Pippin, because we all have our moments of being the Pippin. And by the way, if you do that, then it means that it puts pressure on the rest of us not to, because we have to make up for you. It puts extra burdens on us, the other players, because you were doing that thing. So then I might feel like, well, I can't do a thing because they're doing a thing. Keep in mind the context of your game. If you're playing a very character-focused game where everyone's engaging with their quirks all the time, hey, that's great. Might not be for me. It might be for you. That's great. But in general, keep it to a moderate amount of behavior. Think about once per session for engaging with a quirk. Thinking about when you engage with that quirk. Think about your other players and the GM too, because everyone has goals. Everyone has desires. I talked about a Claricon wrap-up stream where a couple of players just really sidetracked the entire session for an hour because they were all deciding to engage with their particular quirks. And just as a watcher, as an observer, it was extremely frustrating. Don't be that person. Look at your fellow players. Look at what you're there to do, taking in context, and think about, hey, is this the right time for this? Have I done it already? Have I already gotten my free meal? And there's another one. Do I need to do that again? Or can I just role play that my character's full because I just ate? Think about those things. And then if it's the moment to use your quirk, then do it. Because yeah, we're here to play characters. We're here to have fun. But as usual, with all these things that are fun, don't let the fun, your personal fun, override the fun that everyone else is having. I hope that answers, explains. In any event, game on, everybody. Talk to you later. Bye now.
What about second breakfast?